The brain stem is a bit of a nightmare. It's complex, it's twisty, turny, convoluted. It's got a lot going on. And we'll start by looking at the cranial nerves. And yeah, so you need to know the nerves themselves. We're going to be looking at some origins. In other words, where, in origins, when it comes to cranial nerves, has kind of a complex meaning. There are a couple of things. Where do they originate in exiting the brain and the brainstem? And where are the nuclei that lead to them? So I'll try to point all sorts of things out with both of those. The fiber components. When we talk about the fiber components, we're back to discussing, are there motor fibers, are there sensory fibers, are there parasympathetic fibers? I will give you a little mnemonic for that if we didn't already talk about it. We may have touched on it earlier in the semester. I'll bring it back for you. This was a mnemonic given to me by one of the people that taught for me a number of years ago. So don't be offended with me, be offended with her. Ganglia. There are a number of ganglia involved. I am concerned that some of you have lost track of what a ganglion is. A ganglion basically is where we have a group of cell bodies with a group of axons that interact with it. When I refer to a ganglion, you have to think about what is leading to the ganglion and what is coming from the ganglion. So we'll talk about that. We'll look at those. The functions. Cranial nerves have very specific functions. So we'll be running through those functions. We'll be talking about them. You're responsible for them. So we'll be using a wide variety of figures. I've brought in figures from some other texts. A lot going on. So if we just look at the general concept of the cranial nerves, my guess is you all know some mnemonic for the cranial nerves. There are lots of mnemonics out there. You can go all the way back to the original mnemonic I learned in high school, an old Olympus towering top of Finland, German Judenhaft. Made no sense to me. You could learn the one that I learned at the medical school, which is a little more on the body side. To touch and feel a girl's vagina and hymen. Or you can try some other one. Regardless, you have to be able to think about the organization. Number one, the olfactory nerve is involved with olfaction, your sense of smell. We'll take a look at what's involved with that. We're going to take a look at what's involved with all of these. So this is just kind of a grocery list of things. Number two, the optic nerve, vision. 1 and 2 are entirely sensory. There's nothing else to be concerned with as far as these go. Everything else gets more complicated. Number 3 is the oculomotor, eye movement and pupil constriction. We're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the oculomotor nerve and other nerves involved with eye movement. Eye movement is critical. You're a visual species. You rely on collecting a lot of data using your eyes. Your eyes have to be quite mobile. The reality of the situation is that you have, a number of nerves, and a number of cranial nerves involved with vision. Only one is involved with the actual collection of data. All of the others are involved with movement. So oculomotor. The trochlear nerve is another one of those cranial nerves involved with eye movement. We'll look at specifically with the abducens, with trochlear and oculomotor. We're going to look at these specific eye muscles that are innervated and what happens. Trigeminal nerve, facial sensation and mastication. That's complicated. Sensation and chewing. I mean, when you think about it, that's as disparate a group of behaviors as exists. Trigeminal, 3 origins. So when we look at this nerve, all of a sudden it's going to make sense, the name. The abducens, eye movement, and specifically it abducts the eye. Abduction is moving away from the midline of the body. We get to the facial nerve. Once again, a whole series of complicated and disparate and not at all related outcomes. We have all of your facial expressions. So facial expressions, that's motor, that's movement. Then we have taste, lacrimation, salivation. All right, well, lacrimation and salivation are both glandular, so they're secretions, so that makes some sense. We get to vestibulocochlear. I learned it as the auditory nerve. That's what it was called years ago. Anyway, the vestibulocochlear, more appropriately named now, is involved with balance, the vestibular component, and hearing, the cochlear component. We'll look at the complexities of that. Glossal pharyngeal. Glossal meaning tongue, pharyngeal meaning pharynx. This has many innervations involving the pharynx, the posterior portions of the tongue, salivation, carotid body reflexes. So there's a lot happening. Number 10, the vagus. The vagus is the big parasympathetic nerve. It innervates the vast majority of your internal organs, provides most of the parasympathetic signals going to all of your digestive organs, your respiratory, your heart, everything else. It also innervates some pharyngeal muscles and your aortic arches. The aortic arches, if you don't remember, are very, very important for control of blood pressure. The accessory nerve, more appropriately the spinal accessory nerve, involved with turning your head, is a complicated nerve. It has very complex origins in that some of the origins are cranial and some of them are actually spinal. Therefore, it's called the spinal accessory nerve. And finally, the hypoglossal nerve, hypo, below, glossal tongue. This is the nerve that innervates that whole complex group of small muscles along the inferior aspect of the tongue. So it's interesting because on occasion someone will be in a car accident or you'll have some form of trauma. You end up in the ER and they start doing all of these tests. They start doing things like have you turn your head one way or the other, look up, look down, stick your tongue out, roll your tongue, close one eye, do this, shine a light in one eye, look at the other eye. And they ask you a whole series of questions in the process. And those questions don't have a darn thing to do with seeing if you can follow directions. What they're doing with each and every one of those questions is testing your cranial nerves. They'll have you wrinkle your forehead. They'll have you smell something. They'll do all sorts of close your eyes and move you one way or the other. Each and every test within there is testing one of the cranial nerves, looking for damage. So with the cranial nerves, just like almost everything we can think of, you have to go back and look at what's happening developmentally. So here you are, 5 weeks after fertilization. You still have the gill arches in here, the pharyngeal arches. And you have the cranial nerves developing. Here's your primitive retina. So here we have 1, 3, you can't see 4, it's 1, excuse me, this is 2, you can't see 1, it's under everything here. But you can see as we move back, the cranial nerves are in numerical order. By the time we get to the adult brain and brainstem, the back end here is very, very confusing. 10, 11, and 12 just don't make a lot of sense. All right? Here's 10, here's 11. Okay, 11 is in front of 10 and behind 10. Here's, 11 over, 12 over here. I'm sorry, I'm pointing to the wrong things. Here's 11, here's 12. And 12 has actually got roots that are ahead of 7 and 8. And you go, but I thought they were in order. And they were in order until your brain started folding. You have to remember that folding that takes place following weeks 7 and 8, where you start to actually have the two sets of folds happening, rearranges, everything going on. Many different figures that'll show you this, all right? There's figures in Sibelius, there's figures in your textbook. You can look up more figures online. Any anatomy book that you use has a figure that looks like this. Whatever it takes for you to figure it out. Now, there are a couple of ways that you should organize this, because there are actually 4 good groups. We've got this anterior group, 1 and 2, all right? Then we have this group here, 3 and 4. 5 sits all by itself, and then we've got the group that sits here. How do we organize these? All right? 1 and 2 are anterior to the pituitary. This is the infundibulum, so here's your pituitary sitting there. Okay? 3 and 4 come out along the anterior aspect of the pons. 5 pops out to the side of the pons. 7, 8, and 9, 6, 7, 8, and 9 come out where the medulla and pons come together, and then 10, 11, and 12 come out from the medulla. So organize them. Take this drawing, print this page out, circle them as 4 different groups. 5 if you want, but I think of them as 1, 2, 3, 4. Bang. And you should be able to locate them at that point. Functionality becomes kind of interesting, strange, bizarre. And the question is, do they have sensory function? Do they have motor function? Do they have parasympathetic function? You know there are 4 cranial nerves that have parasympathetic fibers. The oculomotor, number 3. Number 7, the facial. Number 9 and 10, glossopharyngeal and vagus. So that shouldn't be anything new for you. We looked at that when we looked at the autonomic nervous system. Motor function becomes pretty straightforward. As a matter of fact, everything has motor function except for 1 and 2. Well, that's pretty straightforward. 1 and 2 are purely sensory. Vestibulocochlear is kind of interesting in that it has minimal amount of motor function. It moves some very tiny muscles in your middle ear that allow you to move some ear bones, but other than that, it's mostly hearing. But for our purposes, 1 and 2, those are pure sensory. Now, when we get to sensory function, it's all over the place. 1 and 2, 5, 7 through 10. Bang. So, go through, once again, you could print this out, you could highlight it, organize it however you want. The mnemonic that was taught by one of my former students, some say marry money, but my brother says big boobs matter more. Some being sensory, marry, money, matter more, my are mixed, and the B's are both. Excuse me. M is motor, B is both. S can go, it's 8 here, can go either way. Please remember that it has a small number. It is totally negligible, okay? But they are some motor fibers. When we talked about the parasympathetic fibers the